The theocracy of Canseri. Little can be said to be truly common to all of Canseri. The current power structures and territorial arrangements have arisen from a history of strife, both internal and external. Many times the people of Canseri have been betrayed. They are despised by the rest of the world, but they endure, secure in the belief that they are made strong by their hardships. Since the reign of the Devil Kings, the customs of Canseri have continued uninterrupted, though the government has not. The Milindesians have a proverb: everything wicked comes from Canseri. This saying illustrates the depths of ignorance about the country. The lands of Canseri are harsh and unforgiving. Canseri was once the largest Koryani province and, at the same time, its least populated. Arid plains of dry, hard earth and rocky badlands dominate the landscape. Summers on the plains are oppressively hot and winters are bitterly cold. There is precious little to recommend most of the nations as a comfortable place to live. Northern Canseri is dominated by Nair Spine, a rugged mountain range of active volcanoes. This unforgiving land has forged a harsh and warlike people, the Nairites of this area are ruled by the Valvirden, a family that follows a simple creed: only the strong survive. Infants that appear at all sickly or deformed are left in the wilderness to die. If such a babe lives long enough to be found by some shepherd or wanderer, then it is deemed worthy to live, and indeed many of the greatest heroes of the North had their beginnings in just such a fashion. To be considered a man, a Nairite must set forth into the mountains with nothing but a knife. There he is expected not only to survive, but also to prosper. Those that succeed may take their place as warriors. Those that fail either die in the mountains or are cast into the lowest ranks of society. Southern and western Canseri is dominated by the cold plains, an unforgiving landscape with extremely limited agriculture potential. This is the land of the Nerothians, a grim and humorless people. The commoners live their lives in constant fear of the tyrannical rulers that lord over them. The ruling class, made up exclusively by the Valmordain, on the other hand, has no fear of death. Death means release from the eternal crushing weight of the material world. They have no fear of evil, for by acting on impulse, they purge their souls of regret. They have no fear of suffering, because hardship only leads to the strengthening of the spirit. The holy prophet Becherek taught them that the material world itself is inherently evil, and thus the things of the body are of no consequence. Death is a journey that only the mind can take. It represents the natural end of earthly suffering. True, final, eternal death is only achieved by those that are pure in spirit. All others are reborn continually from the cauldron, ever seeking to relearn the lessons that hardship teach until their souls are pure. Sentient undead are the blessed of Neroth. Only those whose souls are close to purity can live on as beings of pure intellect, free to contemplate spiritual perfection while completely unhindered by the demands of the living flesh. They rise on rotting limbs to teach Neroth lessons to the living. Central and eastern Canseri are the most hospitable regions, where the Tengus and the Naikau River provide ample water for agriculture and help to temper the climate. This is the home of the urbane Valmihan family and the seat of the worship of Sarish. Outwardly the most friendly and accommodating group of Canceries, their civil discourse and pleasant manner conceal a deadly wit and treacherous nature. Their way of life is filled with formula and rituals. From the earliest days, they are taught charms and catechisms meant to bring order to the chaotic and unpredictable world around them. Tradition holds that Lord Sarish long ago taught his children words have power, and he gave to them the necessary formula to regulate and bind his infernal servitors. Even today, children are taught the ancient prayers regardless of caste. Even if they do not understand the tongue in which the words are written, they learn to pronounce the incantations by rote. Sarish taught the words can not only make powerful rituals, but can also be used to craft binding oaths. Vows such as, I so swear this by Sarish, is a powerful oath, and even when not sanctified by a sorcerer priest of Sarish, they are thought to carry the curse of the Lord of Oaths. So useful is this vow that its usage is commonplace across the known lands. Beggars to kings, commoners to nobles, soldiers to priests, even other gods regularly invoke this oath. It is illustrative to note that vows taken by every king or emperor, and even by the head of the mother church, just before taking office, all end with the phrase, I so swear this by Sarish. Nishanpur, I discovered, was the darkest part of the shades of gray. And where the blood ran so red, it looked black. When Nishanpur entered the Arcanis um, knowledge base, when people became aware of it, was right away. Blood Rain of Nishanpur. They went, the initial adventures, Spear of Logan, Blood Rain of Nishanpur, introduced you to this amazingly foreign world, this land that was ruled by a dark triumvirate of a part of the mother church that was being neglected in other lands. Sarish, Neroth, and Nair. Each was considered too violent, too horrifying, or too untrustworthy. And lo and behold, Paradigm Concepts opened this up to allow it to be developed by some of the fans. Some of those fans were so devoted and so intrigued that they stepped forward with their years of organizing and role playing and various gaming groups. And this group was led by my guest today, Kimberly Wajer-Scott.
Hello.
So, welcome, Kimberly. Please tell us about Nishanpur.
Oh, where to begin? Well, I would say that Nishampur, well, it's been there since the beginning. I mean, honestly, it was leading into Kanserai and Nishampur was one of the very first things Paradigm ever did. I mean, they created this framework with the Koreani Empire and Milner, but the first module they put out, Spear of the Logan, already had you setting foot across the borders out of their territory into this world of Kanserai. And that's that is again where I discovered it, because we were just, our gaming club was looking for new places to do, and here was this whole world that to me appealed to me because there were so many references to real history, all the little tidbits, all the little the little things like Spear of the Logan. This is of course based on the Spear of Longinus, which is in the Judeo-Christian mythology, theoretically the spear that punctured the side of Jesus. They took that and put a fantasy spin on it, and now you have the Spear of Longinus. Even from the beginning, everything had these little historical nods to it. And Nishampur as well. That's a cool name. Did you realize it's the name of an old Indian city, a city in North India? It's
Oh
a
yeah, I
yeah,
researched all this stuff like
yeah,
obsessively over the years. Believe me,
yes.
when I ever, because especially as whenever I come across somewhere else and I go, what? This, and then I'll look it up and go, oh, that must be where Henry or and Jared Fennell or some of those
Hmm.
other original writers. They must have been inspired by some of that because I knew those guys from my gaming circle in Miami. I'd moved down there in 93, no, 94, as I was getting ready to start school at University of Miami, Coral Gables, and the local gaming store was called Giant Gila Monster, and that's where, all the people who started PCI, as well as the initial circle of writers, were all from that crowd, all that gaming crowd in Miami.
Yeah.
And all of them love the classics, classical education style of reading. So I thought that was very interesting. That's one of the things I also picked up on right away, was all the verisimilitude, all the things that I could say, oh, this sounds so real, that it's based off of real things.
And that's really what attracted me to it. Our gaming club, we're from Southern Indiana, and
Who is
the
your gaming
total.
club? Give them a shout out.
Oh
Are they
yes. Well,
extant?
at that time, my husband and I were running the Evansville Gaming Guild, which had been around since the 80s. We had moved location to location in the city at that point in time, where in 2001 we were operating out of the back of the local store Comic Quest.
Yep. I went there a few times.
Mm-hmm. But yes, um, yeah, and we were at that time officers of the club. We were running all of the weekly game nights, and we had quite a local crew. At any given Friday or Saturday night, we could have anywhere from 20 to 40 people showing up to game.
Yeah,
So,
that's what I remember was you guys consistently had 4 to 5 tables.
oh yeah, yeah, we'd been very involved in RPGA. My husband and I were RPGA, sanctioned judges at that time, and
Mhm.
of course there was always the long running campaigns of this, that, or the other. But we kind of picked it up. We're doing lots of one shots, lots of the RPGA modules to pick up anybody who showed up, and oh, the regular game couldn't happen today because somebody's sick or whatever. So we were always trying to gather people up and give them something to do. And that's how we discovered Arcanis. Um,
So
in
were you involved in pre-living RPG? So I'm a pre-living RPGA judge.
Yes, we were there before the living. We were doing RPGA stuff back in second edition, and previous to the whole living campaign, where everything was pretty much just one shot modules and all of that.
So did you maintain kind of that toss up? I mean, I talked about this in one interview, one episode, that like I liked that in role playing and going to Gen Con. What I enjoyed was this opportunity to sit down with a bunch of new people, just be given a random character, and I looked at that as like working on my role playing chops, right? This was more of an opportunity. I wasn't invested in the character, so I could be like really crazy, and I could really like just role play. Did you do that as well? What was your relationship to that style of play? Because I'm trying, what do they call it now? Like the old style convention play, there's a name for it or a term.
I'm not remembering the term, but I'm sure at some point it'll come to me, like tomorrow.
Right, exactly.
But yeah, at that point in time, our gaming club ran local conventions, and I was active on that. But I've been the forever GM since the early '90s. So for me, I loved the you know learning to roll with the punches of, you never know what's going to sit down at the table, how people are going to, even knowing that, oh, I have this set pre-gen character, everybody's take on that pre-gen character was going to be different.
Hmm.
Every table you ran, there was a different personality coming out to put together with that set of stats. And it was challenging and fun, because you had to kind of work with what the people gave you at the table.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So were you like one of these regional writer managerial types in the original RPGA living stuff?
No, no.
'Cause I didn't quite, that always was kind of like confusing to me. So if people aren't aware about, for example, how Living Arcanis works, it doesn't matter where you live, you're just going to play Living Arcanis, the same mods as everybody. In the Living Greyhawk, like depending on where you lived geographically, apparently not just in the United States, but kind of around the world, depended on where you could adventure with your local gaming table, and you had to travel outside, literally out of that geographic boundaries to
Yeah, I do remember that. I was not part of any staffing for that or anything else. I was just sort of the logistics organizer for local play, but Arcanus was the first and only campaign I actually wrote for.
awesome.
Previous to that, I was just a judge who would bring in modules and organize play for our local players. And what really caught my eye with Arcanus was that first module they put out through RPGA. They did a preview.
So shall you reap.
Yes, so shall ye reap. And that very first one, it caught me because I saw the historical nods in it and everything. And I'm like, I like this because from my background, my degree is in classical archaeology.
There you
So
go.
I came at this going, I appreciate these historic nods. I'm attracted to this setting. And I started looking to what else has this company published, because this, of course, was right at the beginning of the OGL boom.
Mm-hmm.
Companies were putting out new settings all over the place. You were inundated in it. So it's like,
Kind of had to
find,
pick a team and stay with it then.
yeah. So, it's like at the beginning of this, our gaming club, we started dipping our toes into this, that, and everything to see what we liked and what stuck. And for me, it was like, I like this setting immediately because of the historical verisimilitude and everything. It's like, and the fact that they did present the idea that there was more of a grayness to the setting and everything. And it's like, okay, what else has this company done so far? And I found Spear of the Logan, Blood Rain of Nishampur, because I started at this in the fall of 2001. So those two modules and So Shall Ye Reap had been put out yet. But, even the core books were only just getting finished up at this time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I had the game store order those,
Mm-hmm.
and I actually created pre-gen characters for Spear of the Logan and Blood Rain of Nishampur so I could run them as one shots in our local gaming club to
Awesome.
get people invested in this system with
Get them
me.
exposed, absolutely. Because you
Mhm.
use the word that I use, and I'll tell you, I wrote, excuse me, I wrote a review um, for the campaign and for the Codex Arcanus way back, 2002, whatever. And you use my favorite word, verisimilitude. That's what grabbed me. My background, I mean, I was a philosophy major, but I studied um, physical and cultural anthropology as well as uh, cultural anthropology. It was like, yeah, I'm reading the Codex Arcanus, and it's like I'm listening to a cultural anthropologist explain what they're seeing, someone who has, found the testimony, first person accounts. It was really interesting. And that's kind of what it was based on, right? There was this Vala baby um NPC, non-player, some person who was traveling through the world, through the continent, and uncovering stories.
Yeah,
It was a
shout out to my man Ibn Battuta.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's I mean, this really was. And what I'm discovering, and what I guess I knew intuitively from the beginning, both from look at who is producing this content on all levels. The Paradigm team were very well educated, classically educated, and they brought this broad, deep appeal, this broad, deep knowledge base that created a feeling of you're reading history instead of a third person omniscient uh, book out of, the reference library.
Mm-hmm.
So Nishampur. All right, let's talk about it. So here we are. You're doing all your stuff in Evansville. That was so is that club still extant? Are they still around?
It is not. It that club dissolved about 10 years ago, just due to the fact that those of us running it were getting older, and we found ourselves unable to pass it on to the next generation, just
Yeah.
due to the way things went. It has been reincarnated at least twice under different names. I think currently we are the Tri-State Gamers, but
Okay. What are the three states? Indiana, Texas,
Indiana, Illinois, Kentucky. We're
Kentucky.
right we're right down in that little tail of
Yep.
Indiana where it meets up with Illinois and Kentucky.
Yep. I like that region. It's a real interesting. As a total aside, since you're into archaeology, my next door neighbor when I lived in Lexington, Kentucky, was a field archaeologist, PhD candidate who was a former Delta Force major. And what he did for the state of Kentucky was go out and do surveys of all the ancient sites that were being, maintained and protected. But he was doing his PhD work in that area right
Oh,
there.
there is a lot of history here. A few miles from where I live, there is a very large Native American Mississippian era site called Angel Site that I used to docent at. I mean, this
Mhm.
whole area, I mean, has had a long history of habitation by different cultures.
He discovered on, of course, some farmer's land what may be the oldest example of a built structure, permanent structure in North America. That he came across an area where, they basically dug a depression and then the posts holes around it. And, this very classic early type of structure from that time. Um,
Habitation in this area goes back to the Ice Age.
right, right.
Yeah.
Yep. So here great. So yeah, you come into Arcanis. You
Mm-hmm.
have this kind of background, you have this kind of fascination with implementing and incorporating real world examples and giving them the Arcanist twist, as
Mm-hmm.
became known.
Yeah.
So tell us about the work you did with creating Living Nishampur. How did you make that happen?
Well, that happened purely by chance, honestly. It as I became invested in this setting, I created Onara Online, which some people might remember as the first fan site for Arcanis.
Yep.
And I started compiling all the scattered information because, being that historically minded person myself, I'm like, there's all these tidbits of the history of this world, disconnected and scattered through the modules as they get published and this or that. So I started compiling that on a website. It's like, here's what we know about the history of Cancerai or Millendir or whatever. Here's, biographies of these NPCs as they're appearing, because they're mentioned here and they're mentioned there. And it's like combining this information into, what do we know about these people? And PCI noticed.
Okay.
They found that website. I got on the early forums because I was, looking for more modules, looking for more material for my groups, and they noticed that fan site and they contacted me. My first introduction to this, after I had been running the modules and all that, is in early 2002, after I had started building up Owner Online and all that. Henry invited me to come to Gen Con and judge for the Gen Con tournaments at and all of that. And
That would be the year we met. That
yes,
was,
that was. And I was stunned. I was flattered, but and it's like, wow, you know what I did, somebody liked, cool. And so we went up, and this was the last year Gen Con was in Milwaukee.
yep,
Yep. So we went. So
I was
you know,
there.
yep.
Last
So
We
me and my
got,
crew, we packed up anybody who could get the time off, and we hauled our butts up to Milwaukee. And it was awesome. It was. I had judged regional conventions before, but this was my first actual Gen Con. So
mhm.
that was like ranking up
Yeah,
as
it's
a judge.
kind of intimidating. I've mentioned this also that, when you're judging at Origins and Gen Con now in particular, it's different because it's not like the home game where if someone dies and whatever and they throw a little temper tantrum, whatever. But now, you're responsible for people who've paid thousands of dollars to have fun.
Oh yeah,
That's
yeah.
a lot of, you know,
Oh, there's
that's
pressure
a lot of
there.
responsibility.
And that doesn't just come from internally too. That first Gen Con, that was the first time I felt tested as a GM. My local and regional people, they knew me.
Mm-hmm.
They knew I knew the rules. They knew I was, on the spot. I knew what I was doing. When I went to Gen Con, I still remember the first Arcanist table I sat down on.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, tell me about your characters. Let's get going. And literally I had someone, I don't remember who it was anymore, but somebody was sitting there going, yeah, my character's just Saresin, and this, that, and the other. And then he starts pulling out stuff, and I have this ability, and I'm like, excuse me. He was trying to pull one over on me. He was testing me to see if I actually knew the rules and
Wow.
what they could get away with. It's like, no, that's not how the book says it. How do you have this? And they're like, oh, okay, yeah, I was just checking if you knew what you were talking about.
Fuck that.
Yeah.
That's bullshit. That's like one of the most misogynistic things I've heard from.
Thank you. You recognize it. It is
What the
misogyny.
fuck?
This was 20 years ago, remember? This was
I don't
22 years.
care.
Yeah, it wasn't right then, but it was something I encountered. And that
Wow. Yeah,
that
yeah.
even
Holy shit.
oh, that
What
was
I
something.
do.
I Henry and his crew are great, but I even had to nudge Henry a little on this. He was
Mm,
never intentionally misogynistic, but he very much has the paternal Cuban guy, Cuban dad kind of thing going on.
yeah, 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 yeah.
And again, I think it was probably still that first Gen Con. He walked around the tables and checked on stuff while we were running and all that.
Oh yeah, well, yeah, right,
Oh
right.
yeah, oh yeah. I
It's
mean, he
the
was,
same way
and
today.
at one
So
point, I had a table going. We had that thing. We were bantering and all that, and they were, and somebody was swearing a little or whatever, and Henry leans over and he goes, "Hey, don't talk like that in front of a lady." And I had to turn around to
Yeah.
him
Oh,
and,
that's
and go, "What lady? There's no lady here." And after the table was over, I'm like, "Henry, don't ever do that again." And he's like, "What?" And I'm like, "They thought of me as one of the guys. We had our mojo there. You
undermines
said
your
that, and
authority
it shut the table
100%.
down because suddenly they realized I'm a woman,
Yep.
and everybody clammed up. The person who was, the man who was playing a female character suddenly got flustered because, you know,
Now he was
and all
playing
that. And it's
in
like,
front of a woman, and
yeah,
you.
and it's like, no, come on, we had our mojo. I was one of the guys. Don't do that to me ever again. You killed the vibe at this table. And he didn't understand it at first. And I'm like, no, you don't get it. You're all guys. I had to work hard as a GM coming up through the 90s and all that to get people to just go with it, to see me as one of the guys, to not think about the fact that, you know, because women were still a minority in gaming at that time. It's a lot
Mhm.
more it's a lot more equal now. There's a lot more women involved and all that, but that wasn't true back then.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I talk about, so as I was getting out, my last Gen Con was 2007, and that was the first one where I looked around and went 1 in 10. With that, 1 in 10 of the people I looked around were women, and that was 2007. So
And in
2000,
2001, it was less. And then we look
correct.
at that percentage that was GMing.
Because it was collectible card games that had like Pokemon that drew more women initially into um
Right.
hmm.
But by 2001, the initial Pokemon audience was just hitting 18ish. Pokemon's a little bit older than Arcanist, but not a whole lot.
Right, right.
But,
Um,
but yeah, there were more, but that
yeah,
was
so
still that was a factor.
I mean, just thinking back to that, so that year 2002, it was a great time that last year in Wisconsin. Both if you'd been there, I'd been there a number of times by that point. And then came specifically to be an Arcanis judge that year, came up from Miami. Um, and got to meet like some really, I was really impressed at some of the cohesive groups. So like my first two tables were those guys from Atlanta. Remember that?
Oh yes, I remember that crew. Oh
Now
yeah.
I'm running these guys and they're acting like special ops teams giving each other hand signals instead of talking.
Oh yeah. My home group was like that too. My home group was like that too. That you could always tell who had entered in from smaller groups and who had an established larger group where they had been playing together a long time, and who just showed up as an oddball at the table because they had a ticket, because there were definitely a lot of the formal groups that traveled together. They
Mm-hmm.
came in, their characters meshed, their characters played together, and they were a unit.
Mm-hmm. So were were you playing that way yourself? You guys were like playing as a unit before you started focusing, or were you ever really playing? Did you ever really have a character?
I had one character in Arcanus, only one,
Uh-huh.
and I think I maybe played 6 modules in the entire 7 years that I was there with him, because I am the forever GM. And that's
Yep.
always been that way.
Yeah.
When I went to conventions, I don't know what to do with myself if I'm not working. I
Same
need
thing.
When I started doing it, I iron judged that first Gen Con. I
Yep.
ran every single slot. I barely slept because that pumped me up. That pepped me there, you
Yep.
know. But my husband and the rest of my gaming group, they judged a little, but they were more players. But I never really played the setting. I was the one who introduced it to everyone else. So I was the one who, I read all the modules first because I was the one who ran it for my husband and his crew, who then turned around and ran it for others, you know.
The infamous slot zero.
Oh
That's
yes, I was always the zero judge. So I never really played because, well, I knew too much. I always had already read if I wasn't writing the module, I'd already read it or
yeah.
talked to the person who wrote it, or had something where it's like, no, I'm not playing this one. It
You'd have
wasn't until year
input
6 or
or
7 that the campaign had gotten so big that I played some of the Invisible Kings mods and stuff because I had nothing to do with them, you
Mhm.
know.
Right.
But
Well,
that
so
first year,
let's move into that because so for me, I was also mostly the person introducing, mostly the judge. I had two characters. I had my living Arcanus, who was Nicodemus Argentum, who was a first level patrician, and then started going into fighter and discovered, uh-oh, he needs magic, and then went into magic, and by that point I became so worthless. I couldn't do anything other than be the annoying patrician. So I just kind of leaned into that. And my other character was a Darkkin in Living Nishampur, and he was kind of like a silent bouncer enforcer type. And I played in the Nishampur Battle Interactive right there in Evansville. Um,
which
so
Nishampur Battle Interactive? I believe there was more than one, and one of them was in Fort Wayne, Indiana.
yes, that was the one.
Yeah,
For
that was the big one, and that was in Fort Wayne.
all right, because that was right. Yep, yep.
Yeah, that
Northern Indiana folk. Me and my ex-wife, we went up there for that.
yeah that Nishampur spun up out of that pure chance. Like I said, 2002, they invited me to come up and GM for them, and that is when Henry and crew invited me out to dinner and asked me if I wanted to write, the first Nishampur stuff. Because at that point, I had compiled all that information on Onara Online, and a lot of the early stuff having dealing with Cancer Eye, I had, compiled it. I had a very good grasp on it, and that was, you know, that really stunned me. I was really like, wow, awesome. And, so it was developing this, where, because it was the dark side and all that. So it's like, yeah, we get to have fun with this. And a lot of it just spun up out of chance. A lot of the whole thing, like that battle interactive that you talked about, like Henry started Nishampur because it's like we've got these plot threads started with Blood Rain and Spear of the Logan. Let's work on that. But he had a story to tell that wasn't necessarily connected to that, which I think is part of why he asked me to come and write this. It's like, we have this, let's, work with this. But he had his own story to tell with the Coriani Empire. So,
Right.
you had to expand a little. You had to get some people into to do other things. And I think after the first, Nishapur really got started with the first LARP that they did with Convocation of the Divine.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember that one,
Yes, I do. I was there.
but that's when the Cancer Eye Church was coming back, into the pantheon,
Hmm.
and negotiating with that.
Yep.
And that's where a lot of players really started getting invested in being from Cancer Eye, playing characters that were related to the Cancer Eye pantheon.
Yep.
And I think that caught Henry a little by surprise, because he was building this, this world of grays, but I think he still expected characters to come into it with a little bit of a white knight thing. That he, even though the world was gray, I think he still expected people to be more heroic than they were. I think it caught him off guard that people wanted to explore the darker side of the gray.
Yeah, I actually talked to him about that once. That and it was just kind of in a casual conversation about differences in upbringing and background, and he'd had a very structured life and background, and he's a very structured person. And I'm like, yeah, man, you don't really understand what it's like to live on the more unstructured part of society.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And yeah, there's a lot of, this to me, Nishampur was that opportunity so like when I was in high school, one of the great things about Dungeons and Dragons for me was how it gave me some structure and began to help me and deal with things and how I was cognitively developing. I really feel that learning how to role play, really learn how to role play, helps with cognitive development. It helps you become an empathic person. And at one point, we did kind of this classic good versus evil campaign, and we split. I was very fortunate. I had about a dozen close friends from my gaming circle in high school, and we just broke up half and half, and we DM'd each other until we got to some crazy high level, and the original first edition, and had all the, and then we went to town at each other. We just played evil, good. What's happening? What's it like to be evil? What's it like to be good? And Canceri gave you an opportunity to think about ethical things without the real world repercussions, because you're walking
Mm-hmm.
around in an environment where you see suffering and the maltreatment of slaves, and there's a lot of really, really dark tones, and you can then be indifferent. You don't have to allow yourself to empathize, because that's not the setting you're in. And it gives you an opportunity to just kind of expand your role play. What's it like to be focused on solving the mystery without caring about the lives around you? That is very different D&D. So what was your original story arc? What did you propose and what was finally accepted?
It really just built incrementally. A lot of the first year of Nishampur and all that was really based around this player faction, the Swords of Nair, that had developed at that first convocation. The group that caught Henry by surprise, that people wanted to play the bad guy. The Swords of Nair were supposed to be NPCs. He never intended that to be a PC faction, but so many people were like, no, I want to do this.
So we're talking a little jargon alert here. Every once in a while I pull this out. So explain what that means, Swords of Nair, why they would have been considered the bad guys.
Okay. Well, they were originally set up, Nair being the god of fire and war and destruction and things of that nature. Also justice, but you know, it was set up in a very fascist manner. The Swords of Nair had very heavy fascist overtones to them as a faction in the NPC, in the way that this organization was written, or at least originally. I mean, things evolved, but so it was not expected that players would want to empathize with or join a fascist faction. That's how that organization had been built. They were, authoritarian religious fanatics, and they the return of their Leonidas Valverde, their great general, their religious figure,
Well,
was
the
part of that.
Avatar Nair. I mean, this was supposed to be the living avatar of their deity of worship.
Yes,
That was so, and the Swords of Nair. Now, these are not the Irdukin. These are actual Canceri citizens.
yes, these were humans and or Val, you know, and again, that there was also that element of racialness, because at least in the initial beginning, they didn't really accept Darkin or dwarves or anybody else. It was humans and Val,
Mm-hmm.
and then the Val were in charge.
Mm-hmm.
And when they came up to that first origins, where they did the first battle interactive, the Battle of Four Armies, and then the convocation of the Divine LARP right after it,
Mm-hmm.
it was completely caught by surprise that two tables of players showed up with Swords of Nair characters going, we're on this side of the battle, and there was nothing planned for that. It was supposed to be 3-player factions against the NPC Swords of Nair. And
Oops.
suddenly literally suddenly it was like, wait, we have to, we either have to tell them their characters are null and void, or we have to create an entire fourth faction to allow them to be this and make encounters.
Well, it's four armies,
Yep,
right?
yep.
So
So
what did you do?
so
Were you writing this battle interactive? Was
I
this
was not writing that at that time. I was still judging then, but I was not formally writing then. So I was at that point I was NPCing at the LARP, and I was judging at the Battle Interactive, but I wasn't writing yet.
Mhm.
I had been given some scripts ahead of time and stuff, so I kind of knew what was going on with it, but I wasn't in charge of anything. Um, but yeah,
Let's
so
see
they,
where
they
you're in charge. Tell me about, because I mean, this is a rare opportunity. You are the Devil Queen, the demonic dominatrix. So tell us how you took hold of Nishampur and put it into your iron grip.
well, it wasn't an iron grip. Serish rules with a velvet glove. No, really, it was just being given the opportunity to develop that part of the world. It's like, given the little scraps we had, it's like, okay, we have players who want to deal with this. I developed the Saritian background, writing up the city of Nishampur, a lot of my inspiration came from Assyrian. Uh, if we want to go back to that the verisimilitude of history, a lot of that, the culture, the way I tried to describe things was, based on Assyrian architecture and North Indian and Near Eastern culture, and that to try and make it distinctly different. Where the Melanesians were more German, the Koreani were obviously very Roman Empire. You know that we ended up with a lot of Near Eastern in Cancerai, and to some extent Hispanic as well. When I was writing the Nerathians, I tried to pull a little bit of Inca and Maya into that. Just in terms of the reverence for the dead and everything else. But we were trying to build up that, like, there's the two hands of building the culture and then looking at what's happening to it. With, like, for instance, the Nairites coming back, it's like, how do these people interact? And a lot of the plots started out small, especially in the first year. We were testing the waters with having a subsetting in a setting that was already still new. And I was not given the okay to really throw big plot wrenches yet. We had to start smaller. We had to work with this. So it was internal conflicts. Some of it was trying to get people interested in the culture, like some of the early modules that took place in the city of Nishampur itself. It's navigating, like I said, the gray ethics and all of that. It's like, how do you want to deal with the fact that there are no good guys here? This plot boils down to insurance fraud, or it's like, so do you support the victims, or do you support the law that's technically in the right, or smaller things to try and bring up those gray ethics. And then it was only with, like, the convention modules and bigger things where I was coordinating with others that we could do things like a battle interactive, or the Nairites actually making moves on the government. That was all very negotiated with others. That was not in my control entirely. I got to do a lot of flavor and some history and all that, but with plot there was always coordination.
So coming out of this development, you were then tapped to do what? Write a book. Tell us about that process.
Oh, that was City of Secrets. That was the first. That was both a source book and a module, kind of wrapped up together, where it was all about the city itself, and then had a module plot built into it to play. And that was my first experience with contracted writing. I mean, I had obviously, written before as a fan, done some modules, done, work on the websites, compiling information, but that was a new and interesting process for me, where I'm actually creating things from scratch, all the way down to stat blocks. And that took a lot of time. At that point, I was between careers. I was freelancing and doing odd jobs, so I had more time for it. And I found it very challenging, because I came into it with love of the game, love of the setting, and then actually having to do it for a job is an entirely different thing.
Correct.
I found writing to deadline very difficult.
The same can be said for my career as a chef. Many people love to cook. Try doing it on a deadline, 7 days a week, 3 times a day, 365 days a year. I mean, it's a different story then, right?
Very much so.
So would you do that kind of a project again if given the opportunity?
At this point, I would have to say no. I mean, I enjoy the setting and all that, but a lot of it, the process of writing kind of sucked the joy out of it for me a little bit. For a long time, I had a hard time, finding a lot of that joy after I had been writing it and running and all that. And that is part of why I did step away after a while. It got harder and harder for me to meet deadlines, for, the modules, for everything else. I actually left when they were starting to do the Cancerai main book. And I had originally been talked to about writing some of that And I did end up submitting a partial manuscript, some of which got rewritten a little bit and used. But I mean, at that point, it just reached a point where it's like I needed to step away because it had just, I wasn't loving it anymore. It was writing to deadline, my brain just locked up. It just didn't want to work with it and all that.
Yeah.
And
Well, it's called neurodivergence. I mean, ADHD brains. A lot of the research now, because as a late diagnosis, I wasn't 38 when I was diagnosed with ADHD, and it was 3 months ago or less now, 2 months ago, I guess, that I was diagnosed with ASD1, where I'm a high functioning autistic. And yeah, I had to learn, I have to learn how to work to deadline. Now, the autistic part of my brain actually loves it. The ADHD part of my brain rebels after a while. And because I have the attention deficit part more than the hyperactivity. So my
yeah,
brain, I'll lose track of what, it's very easy for me to just go from thing to thing to thing to thing to thing to thing, right?
yeah. And I was on that journey as well, but I didn't know it at the time. I also have an ADHD diagnosis, inattentive type, but I did not receive that until a couple of years ago,
Mm,
well into my 40s
hmm.
and long after this. So yeah, I was fighting that battle, but I didn't know what I was fighting.
Well, that's what's brought, and again, that's what's brought me back to gaming is to reconnect with my, ADHD and ASD friends and family of choice,
Yeah, yeah,
that there's, this, and I've begun using the term neurodominant, right? So there is a neurodominant culture, not a neuronormative. And so, yeah, when you talk about finding your tribe, part of that is how do people's brains function, you know?
yeah. And looking at it to that way, what I would say is that, if I had the time in my schedule to come back to Arcanis and all that, I would want to do it as a player or a DM, but not as a writer. I
Yep.
still love the setting. I'm still happy to play, but I have realized more about how my brain works now, and I don't think me coming back as a writer would be an appropriate thing for me to do.
Yep.
That
Yeah,
part I am letting go.
I just started my third character. I played online the other week, one of the intro characters. This is an interesting, I'm not 100% sold on the format of using like Discord Roll20 to game, but I'm willing to give it some time. This is kind of the future. So we're
It's
talking.
the future, but it's not new. Even with Living
Oh,
Arcanist,
true.
back when we did it,
Yeah.
we had virtual cons
Yeah.
running over, what was it? A chat software with
Yep.
VM running. I ran many modules that way where I had 8 text windows open at once, and my PDF version of the module where I'm cutting and pasting box text, and a separate window to chat with every player privately, and then the big party chat, and a 4-hour module took 8 hours to run
Yep.
because
Yep.
nobody could type as fast as they could talk.
Nope. So yeah, that's so I guess that's what always kept me from doing online play, and I was probably fairly resist. I know I'm not probably I was resistant to online play, both because I had stepped away for professional development, and then as I was about 2 years ago, as I was coming out of the kitchen and trying to figure out what to do with myself, I had already started looking at getting more involved with gaming before I was given kind of this, yeah, you should do this therapeutically. Um, and I began to just kind of see what was the state of my beloved hobby in the interim. And I got to tell you, I mean, I was a little freaked out by some of the divisiveness I've seen in the hobby in general, but as usual, the Arcanist community is amazing, and I think it has a lot to do with that paternalistic, patriarchal mindset of Henry, that this is his thing, man, and he wants it to be accessible to as many people as possible. He wants to make sure that it stands for really all of these initial concepts that he brought into gaming before we really saw it like we're seeing today. I mean, I pointed out the Darkkin and the Val before fourth edition. There were no Tiefling or Aasimar player characters. That was definitely something that PCI innovated. And so I'm looking now at, how is Arcanus going to innovate into the future? Um, are you playing now at all, or have you just said, okay, I need to focus on being, a business person and, making my career happen? Are you like where I was?
I played up on and off. I played and continued to role play up until when my son was born in 2016. And then mom kind of took over my life
There you go.
for several years. And I always intended to come back to gaming.
Hmm.
When he was a little older, when it wasn't so difficult to juggle things.
Hmm.
But in the meantime, I mean, 2020 happened, and my career has happened and taken off more now. And I still would like to game. I
Hmm.
still want to. My husband, my family, they still do, but I myself personally haven't found the time in a long time. I'm wanting to introduce my son to it. My son
Cool.
is now 7.5.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
wanting to bring him into the world of gaming. So is my husband, but and but it's like I have to find the time, and it's just that adult juggling thing, because my job makes me work on weekends, and that's when most people get together to game.
Yeah, that was exactly as a chef. Yeah. And when I was working, so like front of the house, when I was uh taking the orders, delivering food, taking drinks, etc., that people didn't understand that I don't know when I'm getting out of work each night. And I
Yeah.
work night when you're going out and enjoying. So let's give a little discussion. So what are you doing now? You were, kind of floating around doing gig work, and then you decided to focus. And so what are you doing?
Well, I picked up a website account, running a website for a jeweler called Thomas the Lapidary, Tom Goodlow. I'm sure a lot of people in the Arcanist community might recognize that name. He got licensed to make the Arcanis clerical jewelry for several of the LARPs.
Hmm.
But I started out putting together a website for his business, and that just kind of grew into, oh, my salesperson is sick, can you come help me out for a day, since you know the
Hmm.
merchandise, you helped with this or that. And then that turned into, I became a salesman for him, then I apprenticed under him, now we're business partners. And I have been a jeweler since probably around 2003, 2004. So I'm now working on, our business focuses on reenactment, historical style jewelry and fantasy jewelry, LARPs, Ren fairs, things like that. So I travel around running our booth for that, and making things and that. So when I say I work weekends, it means I'm there from 6 a.m. until we close at 7, and 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 then
Then you
during the
just
week during the
crash in the
week I'm
tent,
in the
come back the
studio.
next day.
Yeah, and I'm in a tent with no internet signal. So it's like, it's not even that I could sit there and log on to a Discord game on Saturday night after we close, because I don't have the signal for that.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's
Hey,
like if I could catch something on a Wednesday night or something, I might try, but
well, so I mean that there is that's one of the things that I'm discovering. There's guys in Australia who run there are two guys in Australia apparently who run regularly Arcana stuff, and because of the timing, they actually adjust their schedule to East Coast time to run things. So I mean, and there's all types of different days and nights.
Oh, I remember the Arcanis crew from Australia. That was happening even back in the early years. It was amazing to me when I was sitting down to judge and I would have a table coming in from Australia bringing me a box of Tim Tams saying, "Hey, good to see you again." I'm like, when did I make friends across the world?
Right.
You know,
Because
the magic of the campaign.
the campaign and the hobby, that's another common topic for me is that one of the reasons I'm coming back into gaming is because these are the people I know and trust. Again, it's my community, and it doesn't matter that whether they're the guys that I grew up with playing, whether they're people that I met in the various military installations I was stationed at, or they're the various gaming clubs and the people who hang out at the various local favorite gaming store. So I would encourage you, I'm excited by the opportunities to use some technology to increase the opportunity to play Arcanis again. I had a good time. It was obvious the people I was playing with were having a good time. We found ourselves in Kielman, and let the Nihangs pit each other, you know, a little political stuff. It was like a real great introduction where there was some combat. There was an opportunity to do some good, but you might not want to do it because you're in Canceri. But if you do it, lo and behold, things are better for you in the end because now you can use a favor for political purposes and find yourself succeeding in the end. And that was like, this is an Arcanus adventure. This was like the platonic form.
That's something that I've never had in any other campaign. Just like when you mentioned that big battle interactive that we did.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that was, to me, that was like the Super Bowl of battle interactives. That was that. I mean, I was, literally running it from the head table, and I had, and it was just incredible. And it was also probably the only time in my gaming career that I've really met something where it was player faction versus player faction, and somebody was gonna lose. That's something I'd never had in Greyhawk or Forgotten Realms or, everything else. It was, there was going to be a clear loser. Some players were going to walk away having not succeeded. And that was something that I'd never really seen even allowed in a lot of other campaigns that, like, you picked your side, there's going to be a decisive end to it one way or the other. We're not going to end up on a fence and have, the eternal stalemate.
And as we've always said here in this campaign, actions have consequences.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I remember in that battle interactive, I was playing my living Nishampur character, and I was part of that little tiny band of Canceri rebels who were, rebelling against the swords of Nair. But yeah, man, that sucked.
It did, and I do
We got our
feel for
asses
the
kicked.
people who were upset at the end, because I can understand that, but
No,
but
I to me so that's the thing. So this is what is important to understand. And unfortunately, I think it's part of what prevented Arcanus from really like exploding in popularity. This is for players who are a little more mature, who are a little more intellectual, who are a little more in touch with the nuance of role-playing games and the opportunities of looking at your character sheet and saying, hey, there's a charisma score and there are charisma-based skills. That in Arcanus, there are multiple adventures where if combat happens, you've lost and you don't even know it.
oh yeah, very much, very much. And I I know I'm going to sound arrogant saying it. I don't mean it in an arrogant way, but I there were many times GMing where I felt like I was teaching a lesson on politics to people.
That's the
Be,
point.
because
100%. That's what I like about it.
there's a lot of it where it's like the rules say that, in this LARP or whatever, that the NPC is not allowed to openly lie to players. Okay, understandable. That's just a game mechanic. We have to keep things at a base fair.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean I can't dissemble. That doesn't mean I
Correct.
can't double speak.
Correct.
I mean, you see it in real life politics too. It's like that first big LARP, the Convocation of the Divine. I was the High Priestess of Sarish, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And players are coming up to either join the faction or ask questions or whatever, and I pushed a little handwritten contract across the table. If you want to talk to me, sign this contract.
Yeah.
And Henry came up to me very upset. You're not allowed to use magic on players. You can't do a Saritian oath on people. And I'm like, there was no bloodletting, there was no ceremony, this isn't an oath, this is a legal contract. If they think it has more power than it does, that's on them, not on me. I've done nothing. I've asked them to put their name on a piece of paper that says they won't double cross me. That's all I did.
Yep.
If people thought it was something more than it was their fault for not asking. It's like you've got to learn to ask the questions, not just assume. You've got to learn to listen to what I said, not what you think I said.
Correct. And so from that type of lesson, when I played in this last week, I actually, it was very much what is the intent of this person? Are they dissembling? Who do the people around seem uncomfortable with the conversation? Really trying to pick up on context clues because they're written into the adventure.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, that was another thing about this is there was so much background information in these modules that players may or may not have ever seen, but way more. I mean, other living modules and all that were a third the size,
Right.
a fourth the size of page count, because there's so much extra information of what the NPCs know or what they might say or what you can see in the background if you really pay attention.
Mm-hmm. And I feel that it really stretched my dungeon mastering skills, right?
Oh,
It really, really did. It made me, not only did I have to be a better role player, and I'm not one of those I take on a funny, a different voice, but I take on a different persona. And so to do that well, you really kind of need to understand, where is each NPC coming from? What can I reveal and not reveal easily without, requesting some roll of the die? How do we role play out this? And in the very beginning, of course, it had the somewhat pejorative moniker of living box text because there's
yes, I
so much
remember
that
that.
needed to be explained.
Yeah, but there was so much background and so much depth to it that if you paid attention, made a difference.
It did.
Yeah,
It was
it really
perfect.
did.
Well, so just kind of wind down here. I invite you to participate, check out the Arcanis Discord and figure out some middle of the week opportunity. As I get myself more and more educated, I'll start picking up some of the dungeon mastering, some of the running some games through those formats, probably after Origins. Um, so this is that time of year, right? Do you still do convention circuit, or are you just doing the Renaissance?
Uh, our business stopped doing the convention circuit around 2019, 2020.
Mm-hmm.
It just wasn't working for us financially. Nothing wrong with the setting. We loved the bustle of the conventions and all that, but when you look at the way hotel pricing goes and everything else, it was running as hard as we can to break even, because every time we did better and it's like yay, then the hotel bill got higher the next year. And it's just like, no, we can't keep doing that. So.
So what's your next what's your summer look like? Where can people find Thomas the Lapidary?
Well, starting this weekend, we will be at the Tennessee Renaissance Festival just south of Nashville. We will be there every weekend in May through Memorial Day. And then after that, we're going to Eminence, Kentucky, and we'll be spending June and most of July working at Kentucky Highland Renaissance Festival there. And then after that, our biggest show of the year is Pensic War in Western Pennsylvania, right at the end of July, early August. It usually overlaps Gen Con,
Mhm.
but that is a 2 week reenactment war. And then we've got a whole 2 weeks off before our fall schedule starts.
All right.
But yeah, we're keeping plenty busy. But yeah, I think it's time. I think I need to get out the current edition of rule books and get caught up on the way the game runs now, because the system itself has changed many times since I was
You know,
involved.
and this is a whole nother, without, we won't dive into this, but when I left gaming, and it was the beginning of what I consider the good fun, bad fun edition wars mentality. And I've never been an edition, because I mean, when we first started gaming, any game you played had a different system. I remember playing D&D and using the Rollmaster crit tables that
Oh
integrate.
yeah, I mean, I've played since first edition D&D. I've always been a system neutral kind of person. I've played GURPS and Amber and Champions and D&D. I mean, everything from you
Roll
practically have to have a math
hero
degree all the
system.
way to forget it, we're not even going to use dice. I mean,
Yep.
it was about the story and the fun, and that's why I loved Arcanis, is because there was so much world and story.
So I
And I'll, it's like I'll just got to find out what current iteration are we using now so I can be part of this story again.
so I it's fifth edition, or ARG, whichever you prefer. I'm gonna learn ARG. I bought the books, but I've never played. I just supported them through Kickstarter. But I've learned.
I do have some of the books. I did do some of the Kickstarter support. But I also played Witch Hunter. That was the thing, is that because I was the forever GM for Arcanis, I was player in Witch Hunter. It's like, I'm not going to judge this. This is where I get to play.
Cool, cool.
So I'm not totally unfamiliar with ARG.
Yeah, so fifth edition, I find it, you're gonna hear the old school Renaissance guys be all annoyed about it. I like it, to be honest. I mean,
I can have fun whatever the system is.
exactly.
I just have to figure out what are the other people I'm playing with doing, and I'll slot myself in.
And find something to compliment and have a good time.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. It was wonderful catching up, talking about Arcanis. Hopefully I ignited a little flame there, and I will see you on Discord, and we'll be playing sometime soon.
I hope so. Thank you for having me, Ed.
All
Have
right,
a
take
good
care.
one.
You too.